Imagine a land where the cold never ends and every step is a battle for survival. The wind cuts through your clothes. The ground beneath your feet is endless ice. There are no cities, no roads, no help, just white in every direction. More than 100 years ago, a group of explorers walked into this frozen world. Their goal was simple but incredibly difficult: to reach the South Pole. Two explorers were racing for it. One would succeed. The other would become part of one of the most tragic stories in the history of exploration. This is the story of Robert Falcon Scott and the journey that made him famous. Robert Falcon Scott was born in 1868 in Plymouth, England. As a young boy, he loved the sea. So when he was still very young, he joined the Royal Navy. Life in the Navy was not easy. It meant long voyages, strict discipline, and years away from home. But it also built something important inside Scott: leadership, determination, and the ability to keep going even when things became difficult. At the start of the 1900s, the world had already been mostly explored. But one place remained mysterious: Antarctica, a frozen continent at the bottom of the Earth. Very few people had ever set foot there, and no one had reached the South Pole. In 1901, Scott was chosen to lead an expedition to Antarctica. It was called the Discovery Expedition. This mission was not only about adventure. Scientists also wanted to study the continent, its animals, weather, and geography. Scott and his crew pushed southward into a harsh, frozen wilderness. They saw enormous glaciers, towering ice cliffs, and seas filled with floating ice. It was a dangerous place, but the expedition was successful. Scott and his team traveled farther south than anyone before. Even though they did not reach the South Pole, they proved something important. It might actually be possible. When Scott returned to Britain, he became a national hero. But in his mind, the journey was not finished. He wanted to go back. And next time, he wanted to reach the pole. In 1910, Scott returned to Antarctica. This time, the expedition was called the Terra Nova Expedition. His ship, the Terra Nova, carried scientists, explorers, and large amounts of equipment. Their mission had two goals: first, to conduct scientific research; second, to reach the South Pole. But during the journey south, Scott received surprising news. Another explorer was already heading to the pole. His name was Roald Amundsen, a Norwegian explorer. Suddenly, Scott's expedition became something else: a race. Scott and his team built their main base at Cape Evans in Antarctica. For months, they prepared. They carried supplies across the ice. They placed food depots along the route to the pole. These depots would help them survive the long return journey. Scott's expedition used several ways to move across the ice: motor sledges, ponies, dog teams, and human strength. But Antarctica is a difficult place. The motor sledges soon broke. The ponies struggled in the freezing temperatures. In the end, much of the heavy work had to be done by the men themselves. They pulled sledges across the ice, step by step, day after day. In late 1911, the journey to the South Pole finally began. The distance was enormous, nearly 1,300 kilometers. At first, large groups of men traveled together, but as the journey continued, some teams turned back. This was always part of the plan. Only a small group would make the final attempt. Eventually, Scott chose 5 men for the last stage. Scott himself, Dr. Edward Adrian Wilson, Henry Robertson Bowers, Lawrence Oates, and Edgar Evans. Together, they marched toward the center of Antarctica. The cold was brutal. Temperatures dropped below -40 degrees Celsius. The wind never stopped, but the men continued forward. They believed they were close to making history. On January 17, 1912, Scott and his team finally reached the South Pole. But when they arrived, they saw something unexpected: a small tent and a flag. It belonged to Roald Amundsen. The Norwegian team had arrived more than a month earlier. The race was already over. Scott wrote in his diary that day, "Great God, this is an awful place." It was a crushing moment. After months of struggle, they had come second. Still, the men did not give up. They took photographs, recorded their observations, and began the long journey back. The return journey was much harder. The men were exhausted, their food supplies were limited, and the weather became worse. Soon, tragedy struck. Edgar Evans became sick and weak after falling and hitting his head. He slowly grew weaker. On February 17, 1912, Evans collapsed and died. Now only 4 men continued the journey, but the suffering was not over. Lawrence Oates developed severe frostbite in his feet. Walking became extremely painful. He knew he was slowing the others down. One morning, during a terrible storm, Oates made a decision. He stepped outside the tent and said, "I am just going outside, and maybe some time." Then he walked into the blizzard. He sacrificed himself so the others might survive. Now only 3 men remained: Scott, Wilson, and Bowers. They struggled forward through deep snow and freezing winds, but they were running out of food and fuel. Just 11 miles away was a supply depot. If they reached it, they might survive. But a massive blizzard trapped them in their tent. They could not move. Inside the tent, Scott continued writing in his journal. He wrote about the bravery of his men, their loyalty to each other, and their determination to the very end. On March 29, 1912, Robert Falcon Scott died. Wilson and Bowers died beside him. Months later, a search party went looking for Scott's team. They eventually found the small tent buried in snow. Inside were the bodies of the 3 explorers. Scott's journal was still there. The cold had preserved it perfectly. Those pages told the world what had happened. They showed the courage of the men, their suffering, and their loyalty to each other. The news shocked Britain. The country mourned their loss. Today, Antarctica is still one of the most extreme places on Earth. But modern explorers have planes, satellites, and advanced equipment. Scott and his men had none of that. They faced the frozen wilderness with courage and determination. Even though they did not win the race, their story became legendary. Because sometimes, history remembers not only the winners, but also those who showed incredible bravery in the face of impossible odds. The journey of Robert Falcon Scott reminds us of the human spirit, a spirit that keeps pushing forward, even at the edge of the world.